Today is December 6th, 2020. We are here at the Ohio History Connection. My name is Cameron Wood, and I'm here with Charmaine McGuffey to talk with her about becoming Sheriff of Hamilton County. Ms. McGuffey, can you please say and spell your name?
Sure, it's Charmaine McGuffey. It's C-H-A-R-M-A-I-N-E. McGuffey is M-C-G-U-F-F-E-Y.
Thank you. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, at a hospital called St. Mary's, as a matter of fact, in 1957.
1957. So what was growing up in Cincinnati like?
Cincinnati was a great town to grow up in. I enjoyed Cincinnati. I've always loved Cincinnati. I've lived there my entire life. I grew up in a little neighborhood called Price Hill. And, I tell people that I was living in an at-risk neighborhood, and I was an at-risk kid. Price Hill was kind of a lower middle class neighborhood, and, I was there for up until I was probably 25.
So, and you were just with your mom, right?
Yeah, I had a single parent, my mom and two sisters. Our dad left the picture long time before I was ever really, I think I was an infant, at the time. And so we didn't really know him very well. Mom supported us. She was a single parent. She worked very hard. And, consequently, it was a tough life in that regard because, Mom worked a lot of long hours to keep us with the basics. A lot of times when we got up for school, Mom was already at work. And when we got home from school, Mom was still at work. But we were poor, but we didn't know it. I'd like to tell people that, financially we were very poor, but spiritually and emotionally we were rich.
What did your mom do for work?
My mom was a masseuse, and she was a masseuse in her lifetime for almost 50 years, I bet. She was a masseuse when nobody even talked about that. Nobody even knew what it was. And, as a nod to my mom, Bertie, I will say, she was very quick to tell people she only works on women. So but she was a successful masseuse, and she worked very hard at it for many, many years.
Yeah, it is something you don't think about as being an occupation in the 50s or 60s, a masseuse.
No, right. She worked downtown on 4th Street, and she worked in a place called Slendoform. And it was back then, the women went to, it was like a spa, and they had the big roller machines that the women would stand in, and the rolls would roll over you with the theory that it would roll your fat away. And they gave massages and facials and steam baths and things like that. So my mom actually taught me the trade with the hopes that I would someday be a masseuse, and it just wasn't where I wanted to be.
So did they have the what is it, the little shaker thing?
They had the shaker thing, the bell, you name it. At that time they had it, yeah.
So being a masseuse didn't take, but when did you become interested in law enforcement?
I was 14 when I decided that I wanted to be a police officer, and I was so excited about it that I pronounced that to my family, particularly my uncle, who himself had been a retired Cincinnati police officer. And he was very quick to tell me right away, well, that I just got to tell you that's not going to work. Women can't be cops and cops can't be women, and you really need to find a different career because women don't work on the street, they don't wear a uniform. And he was even, so emphatic about it that explained to me why he would not want to work with a woman in law enforcement. And really, the whole time he was explaining all these things to me, I was really thinking, how I was going to get this done and planning my future. And that's what I did. So I started thinking about it. I got my high school diploma from Western Hills High School. I enrolled in Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati, in their criminal justice program. And I got a 4-year bachelor's degree in their criminal justice program. And interestingly enough, in those early 80s there, when I was still in that program of criminal justice, women still could not be police officers on the street. It wasn't until we graduated, and when I say we, there were a few women in the class with me, and we were in that first wave of women that came out into that uniformed peer relationship with those men on the street doing a police officer's job. And the law had just changed, as a matter of fact, right when we were graduating.
Was it your uncle's experience as a police officer, or was it something else that at that age really kind of sparked that interest in you?
Yeah, it really was something else. Well, first and foremost, my mom was very fond of, one of the biggest topics of our conversations in our house was, what are you going to do for a living? So we were constantly quizzed on how we were going to make a living and make that decision, right? So it was partly that, but, I hung around, as I said, in a neighborhood where really all the kids, they were growing up like me. Their parents were working, or they were from single parent families. And so in those kinds of neighborhoods, you just run around with the kids in your neighborhood, the kids on your street, and that's who you spend a lot of time with. And, and the hierarchy really was, because there really weren't any adults around, the hierarchy was, the oldest kid kind of rules. And so, you hope that whoever the oldest kid was, they were going to be fair and just with, whatever game you were playing or sport you played, etc. And really, it's where I learned about social justice. I learned how people get along depending on who's in charge. And at some point in time, I decided, you know what? I want to be in charge of the person in charge, because I want to make sure that things are dealt out fairly and equitably. And that was always something I was concerned with. And I think I did get that from my mom. My mom was very fond of explaining to us that you should always be fair with people. And she had, obviously a great history, and really helped us in our moral direction.
Your uncle didn't sound too enthused about it. How did your mom feel about it? Was that
she didn't like it either. She especially didn't like it when it really started happening. I think she just kind of brushed it off initially, but when it really started happening, and I really did interview, and I got the job, and I put a uniform on, she was worried. She was worried, like a lot of parents are. But my mom was also a very strong person. And, we were tasked with finding our direction. And so she was not a person who would stand in your way.
Do you remember a TV show called Policewoman?
Wow, I do. It's been a while. Yeah.
I'm not very familiar with it myself, but I was looking into things, and they said there was this would be a little bit after you made the decisions to start that direction, but they said there was a spike just simply from that show coming out. It was one of the first to feature a female lead as a police officer.
Sure, absolutely. And I knew lots of girls that were like me, that wanted to do more than the traditional roles that girls typically seek. And particularly, I guess I was what you call a tomboy. I had all boyfriends. One of the things that saved me in my life and kept me on the right path was sports. I played a lot of sports. We endlessly played baseball, basketball, football. I mean, it is absolutely something that just kept me on the straight and narrow.
What sports were you in?
Well, I played baseball until I, was old enough that then it became girls softball in, 8th grade and so forth. And throughout my life, I played A-ball. We call it A-ball. It was what would be a women's professional league. And Cincinnati is where slow pitch softball really took off. And historically, there were a lot of women in Cincinnati that played softball. And great people. We had Sorrentos, we had the Cardinals, we had a number of really outstanding ball clubs there. And what we did is we traveled to tournaments on the weekend. Our weeks were like this, and I did this up until I was in my late 30s at least. You had Monday off, Tuesday you played ball, Wednesday you practiced, Thursday you played in the league, and then Friday you left for a tournament. And then you played ball Saturday and Sunday and traveled back Sunday night and then started all over again. And that's what I did all summer long, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
I guess it would keep you out of trouble, right?
Oh, it certainly did. Yes, absolutely.
You were also a swimmer?
I was. I swam for the University of Cincinnati, and it was interesting. I always wanted to swim, and as I said, we didn't have a lot of money. Kids that grew up in my neighborhood like me, there weren't a lot of opportunities to do certain things that you thought, hey, that looks cool, I'd like to do that. And swimming was one of those things for me. I always wanted to swim, but there were no swim clubs, no parents around to take you to swim meets or anything like that. And so as I graduated from high school and I was an adult, I took some swimming courses. In fact, I was a lifeguard. That was one of my first jobs. I became a lifeguard for Cincinnati Recreation and eventually a pool manager, in fact. I liked it so much. And I took some swimming courses. And when I enrolled in the University of Cincinnati, I went down to the swim coach there, the women's swim coach, and I said, hey, I'd like to join the swim team. And she kind of looked at me and she said, all right. She said, jump in the pool and let me see what you can do. So I swam a few laps. I got out of the pool and she looked at me and she said, well, you're not very good. and I said, I just shook my head and she said, but I tell you what, she said, if you want to join, I'll let you join, but you got a lot of hard work to do, just so you know. And I was thrilled. I was, all right, I'll take it, right? I was absolutely thrilled to be on the swim team. I was a walk-on. And I did work my butt off. She wasn't kidding. I had a lot of work to do. To swim with girls that had been in swim clubs since they were this high, had swam in lots of competitive meets and so on and so forth. I wasn't the best swimmer on the team, but I certainly became a strong, very good swimmer. And, I think it was towards the end of my second year, I was one of the co-captains of the women's swim team. Not because I was the best swimmer, but because I had a good personality. So it was tremendously fun and a lot of work. I stayed after school. Obviously, you had practices in the evening, you had practices in the early morning. We'd jump in the pool at 6:30 in the morning and that kind of thing. So I enjoyed it.
And between that and your studies, it probably kept you pretty busy.
It did. It did keep me busy. And then on the weekends, I played softball. I mean, sports, things like that were my life. And it truly is what kept me, for the most part, out of trouble,
Well, while you're at the university and you're taking your criminal justice courses, how were you looked at as a woman? You said there were other women in your class. Were you still kind of an oddity, or was it becoming, do you feel like it was becoming normal?
Yeah, I think I was a little bit of an oddity from the standpoint that I was always, I was a lesbian my whole life, and I guess I was the proverbial dyke that people talk about. I had some masculine characteristics, so I probably stood out just a little bit in those classes. It was mostly men, and I was a pretty assertive person. I wasn't someone who was going to be intimidated by men or boys, and so yeah, I think I did well in college. I don't know that I was the best student, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the years I was there, and that bachelor's degree, I tell you what, it really meant something to me to understand the larger picture when it comes to criminal justice. And I think it's something that really helped shape who I am today. I never would have thought it back then when I was taking those courses and just trying to get to class on time and trying to get an A on your paper and things like that. But now I think back and I think, wow, that education, it really did stick. It really did form some initial ideas for me about social justice and about what I might do in the criminal justice system.
What did you think at that point, when you're just coming out of university? What was your goal? What did you want to achieve?
Well, my goal was to actually be on road patrol, be a patrol officer. But I joined the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office had a particular way of doing things, because the Sheriff's Office is different than a police department. The Sheriff's Office has the jail, the court services, and law enforcement. And in the Sheriff's Office that I joined, you had to start out in the jail. That's the way you came into the department. So I was a jail service officer to begin with, and I worked at the old Cincinnati workhouse, which was an archaic place. I mean, it was built just after the Civil War. So the cells had no running water, no toilets. It had the tier system, you know. I think, as I recall, there were like 8 tiers to the cell blocks and so forth, and it could house up to 900 prisoners. There was no air conditioning and very little heat in the winter. It was a pretty archaic place with the doors and stuff. But I tell you, I tell people, it was one of the best jails I ever worked in.
How did you feel about that job? Were you excited to get into that job, or did you feel like,
Well, I used it. I thought, this is an entry-level thing for me. You know, it's a way to get my foot in the door. And I even said to myself, I'm going to give this 2 years. 2 years, and I'm going to move on into the system somewhere, you know, patrol, wherever. And in 2 years, I got promoted to sergeant. So then I held a sergeant's rank, and I thought, well, this is a fun job. This is a good job. And I thought, I'll give myself 3 years, and then I'm out to something else. And so 3 years passed, and then I was promoted to lieutenant. And as a lieutenant, I was sent to training. I was sent to train to be a trainer. And I really enjoyed that job, and I enjoyed being a trainer. I spent years doing that, and once I hit that lieutenant rank and I was there in that job and excelling and doing the things I enjoyed doing, I really didn't want to go to any other department then. Then it became less and less likely that I would switch and do something else. Now, in the sheriff's office, I did, in that capacity, work in many different facets of the sheriff's office as I moved around and gained rank. So even though I was based in the jail as a lieutenant, I did have a great deal of latitude to go out to road patrol, to go to different sections of the sheriff's office and learn things and do things. And I taught all over the state of Ohio. I became a very accomplished self-defense instructor. And in that role, I taught all over, in fact, the tri-state, because myself and my partner at the time, Earl Price, he and I fashioned a self-defense course together. And we taught that self-defense course to women and increased their confidence and so forth and their ability to defend themselves. So I did that. I did a number of things as lieutenant, and then after about 5 or 6 years as a lieutenant, I was promoted to captain. And then I was placed in charge of training. So then I had the whole ball of wax there in our training section, and that's the way officers came in. So I ran a training academy for our corrections, for our jail. And it was we had a 8-week training academy at that time. And I ran that. I enjoyed that a great deal. And then eventually I was promoted to major. And I was placed in charge of jail and court services as the highest ranking woman to ever hold that rank in the sheriff's office.
Can you explain what is jail and court services, and what would be what were your responsibilities, and what would an average day be like in that kind of job?
Sure. So as the major of jail and court services, I was in command of some 600 uniformed staff and about 1,400 prisoners, the care and custody of those 1,400 prisoners. So we have the 3rd largest jail in the state of Ohio, down in Hamilton County. And it was a large operation. And really running that jail in and of itself, because the courthouse was separate, but it was something else I was in charge of. And I'll just go back to the courthouse for a minute. You know, the sheriff is in charge of security at the courthouse, particularly for the common pleas judges and so forth, and there's other civil functions that go on that our deputies do in that courthouse. So I was in charge of that, but being in charge of the 3rd largest jail in the state of Ohio is really like being the mayor of a small city that never sleeps. You know, you're in charge. I mean, people don't realize when people live in your facility, the kinds of things you have to pay attention to. We're talking about laundry, you know, commissary, which is your store, you know, phone calls, how those are done and made, visits, you know, just the cleanliness of your jail, people coming and going back to court and medical and all the things you provide, food, feeding people 3 times a day. I mean, it's quite a large endeavor to be in charge of.
What were there elements of it what were the elements of your job that you enjoyed the most?
You know, I enjoyed the people in that job. I enjoyed the people that I worked with in uniform, and I enjoyed the prisoners. You know, throughout my career, I got to know people who were incarcerated, and the interesting thing about it for me was these are people that are experiencing some of the worst circumstances of their life. And sometimes the people that are in jail are even in a better place than they are on the outside because they're secure, they don't have access to drugs or alcohol, which is injuring them, killing them, and poisoning their ability to live life. They struggle with mental illness, and sometimes they're safest in our care because there can be very dangerous things that can happen to you when you're struggling with mental illness. Now, you know, I'm not suggesting jail for every illness, but what I am suggesting is that you get to know who people are and you start to understand why people end up where they do in the circumstances of their life. And I think it gave me a great deal of empathy. And it certainly helped me to understand that we are all connected. You know, I'm not better than you because you're incarcerated. You're not better than me because I'm not. But what we do need to work on, and something that I always felt was very important, is to try and keep people out of jail as much as possible.
Well, you've talked a lot about, you know, the importance of recovery and lowering recidivism, and you developed different kinds of pods.
I did. So when I became the major, I knew from my years of service inside that jail that we had been working in a 1950s model for decades. I mean, decades. And I knew that my main goal was to accelerate us out of 1950 and get us as close to the current year as possible. So I started bringing in agencies. I started a committee, the RAP committee, working to refer appropriate placement. And what I did is I didn't know who was out there because honestly, when you're working in that 1950s model, I mean, you really don't, you're very siloed. And I thought, gosh, who is out there? Somebody has to be out there to help us with this situation because we have a jail population that's doubled the size that the jail was actually built to hold. I watched these people suffer through incarceration and so forth, and I knew that we needed to move it forward. So I invited people word of mouth, and I liken it to this. What I tell people is, you know, I took the jail, I filled in the moat, I dropped the drawbridge, and I put the welcome sign out. And people came. I mean, there were so many people that came to that RAP committee meeting. I had it once a week, same time, same place, so people could find us for years. And through those meetings, from the agencies that came, and not only social service agencies from around the tri-state, but homeless people came. They found their way to us. Formerly incarcerated people, people who had been formerly addicted to drugs and so forth came to those meetings. And out of those meetings, we were able to fashion a what we called the pods, the programs inside the jail. The first was the Men's Veterans Program. And the Men's Veterans Program was designed to put men who are veterans, who are incarcerated, in the same spot and deliver like services to them that they need. Because men who are veterans tend to struggle with housing and PTSD issues. So we wanted to target them for those services. And then the Women's Heroin Recovery Pod. We began obviously realizing that we were in a heroin epidemic, particularly in Hamilton County. It was quite bad, and it was affecting a lot of women and men in our tri-state area. But our women's heroin recovery pod was fashioned to put women in the same spot who wanted to work on their recovery. And then my goal was to keep them as busy as possible all day long. They had to sign a paper that said, I want to work on my own recovery. And I brought in every service you could imagine. Anybody that came to the table that had a vetted real service, I took it to that pod, and that's jobs and family services on how to take care of your kids, a jobs program that taught you about resumes and so forth. Of course, counseling was in there. We had some spiritual programs that went in. We had, you name it, we brought it to that women's heroin recovery pod, and we found out that the women responded. They responded quite well. And then we started the men's exit pod for men who had 30 days or less on their sentence. And that was a way of getting them connected to people, real people, who they can call, who will be there with a hand to help them when they walk out that jail door. And we found that that was a very successful way of moving people along as well.
So those pods were a part of the way that you moved the jail forward.
Right, yeah.
You described it as a 1950s model. Can you describe that for us just a little bit more?
Sure. So the 1950s model worked like this. If you were arrested, you came to our jail. Anybody that was arrested in Hamilton County proper came to our jail, and you would likely lose things. You'd begin to lose things the moment you walk through our door. You may lose your car, right, because it could be impounded from wherever it was left. You can lose your job because obviously you can't go to work for God knows how long. You can lose your children because you're not there to take care of them. You can lose your housing because if you get charged with any particular crimes that forbid housing or for lots of different reasons regarding housing. And the criminal justice system is quite expensive to navigate. If you have the means to hire an attorney, you're paying an attorney. And if you're not, you're relying on the public defender's office. So you're losing lots of things as you navigate our system. And you can sit in our jail for 2 weeks before you ever really get in front of a judge who can say, okay, you can now go outside of our jail and function, in your life on this court order or with bond or whatever way the judge can release you from jail. And in the meantime, if you are living in poverty, it starts to push you further into poverty. And then we would open the door when your time was to get out, right? And we'd say, now go out and do better with less. And that just never made sense to me. I thought, how are we going to move these people along? And in fact, it's one of the things I learned very immediately when I worked in that jail is you see the same people coming back over and over again. And, I thought to myself, there has to be a better way to move people along in their life. And not everybody's going to take advantage of it. I'm a realist. I'm a law and order person. I absolutely am. I ran on law and order. Some people think that because you want people to move along in their life or you want to treat prisoners fairly and you want them to have good food and good medical care and things like that, that you're some kind of bleeding heart. I'm absolutely not. I'm just a realist. I know that if we want to fix this system of mass incarceration, we have to address it from the bottom line, which is the person and what they're experiencing and how we can improve their life circumstance. And sometimes there are people who don't want that improvement. Certainly I've met them. And there are people, by the same token, who need to be incarcerated, some of them for the rest of their lives. I've met those people too. But I do know that the majority of people who are incarcerated, particularly in our jails, we can do better things for those people.
So you took the jail from a place that was just there to hold these people and didn't care what had happened to them before, during, or after, and really made it about the person. And though they need to be incarcerated, you also have to be aware of what they're going through inside and then preparing them for outside again.
Absolutely. I mean, the way that we house people in our jails and in our prisons is very significant to what's going to happen to those people when they are released. One of the things I found that changes the mark quite a bit is called peer mentoring. And that's when you bring people into your facility who have been there, people who have been addicted, people who are alcoholics, who have recovered from that disease, people, who are working with their mental illness and they're functional and doing well. Those people can come into your facility and they can lend a helping hand. And the prisoners that are there that are struggling with those issues can find a kinship, a partnership with people who can help them do better. And I think it's a philosophy that certainly gives people hope. And in fact, as I talk about hope, that is something that people that are incarcerated need more of. We all need hope in our life, and I promise you, because I've been there, I've seen it, when you're sitting in a jail cell and you've lost all of your connection to your personal liberty, you have lost your hope. And to get that hope back means you got to start working on some things. And if we don't provide those things for you to work on, you end up sitting in front of a TV watching soap operas all day and doing very, very little to improve your life.
If you had to pick one thing that you've achieved over that time that you think made the biggest impact, which would it be?
I think the biggest impact that I brought to those people in those jail programs and people in jail, at large, just anybody that's in jail, is the ability to know that, for them to know someone cares about them, someone cares about what happens to them in incarceration, and it does give them hope. I think I brought hope to lots of prisoners, not just myself, but all the people that helped me bring these programs forward. I really want to be clear about that. This isn't just my way of doing things. These are suggestions I took from the professionals in the field and other people who have labored in the criminal justice system and have worked to bring these ideas forward and come in there day to day, and some of them most of them on volunteer basis, to just make other people's lives better. And I think that those people really deserve a lot of credit as well. But I would say hope is the overall, positive thing that I brought to the jail.
When you're trying to move an institution like that in such a major way, there are always struggles. What were the things that you got pushback about?
Well, I got pushback because in our 1950s model, very few people came in the jail and interacted with prisoners. And if they did, they were attorneys or they were clergy. And, other than that, our officers didn't really see very many people. They didn't see many people from the service side of the criminal justice system. And it made them nervous, I think, in a way. Some of the officers welcomed it, but other officers didn't quite understand it. And they were used to that and the officers are trained, and they should be trained, to be very cautious with people, very watchful, and follow rules and policies. And so there was a bit of that, I guess you call it a culture clash a little bit. And those were areas that I took on as my role to smooth those things over and educate the uniformed officers and the social service people how to work together towards the same goal, but with different objectives, of course. So it's challenging. It's absolutely challenging to change that paradigm, but that's what I was doing.
So let me jump back for just a second. You mentioned that you've always been a lesbian.
Right.
When did you come out as a lesbian?
Well, that's a great question. At work, I was not out, I was very careful not to talk about my life at work. I didn't lie about my life. I didn't pretend I was someone else, but I didn't talk about my life. I didn't share it with anyone that I worked with, because I knew that if I were known as gay or lesbian in my career, I knew it would be over. I knew my career would be over. I wouldn't get the promotions that I sought. I wouldn't get treated nearly as well as I was treated as a woman in this situation in uniform. I just knew it would be very detrimental to me. Mm-hmm. So I kept that under the radar. I was very careful about that. Of course, my friends knew I was gay, and my family kind of knew. And at any rate, I went along with my career quite okay like that. People guessed, but it was I like to say it was the worst kept secret sort of thing. But then I was outed at my job. I was outed. It's now been 10 years ago. I was off duty with some women friends of mine. We had gone over to a gay bar, really to watch a basketball game. It was Final Four. We left the bar after the game was over, about 11 o'clock at night. We were in Kentucky, and we were literally just walking to our car in a crosswalk. And there was nobody out. It was dark. It was kind of dead. Even the bar was dead. It was just a basketball game on, right? And I heard someone, when I was in the middle of the street, in the crosswalk, I heard someone screaming, "Drop it. Drop it right now. Drop it now. You're under arrest. You're under arrest." Well, to me as a police officer, that was gun, and I literally thought, standing right there in that moment, in the dark, that I was going to be shot. I really did. I couldn't see anybody. I didn't know where it was coming from. And I finally looked around, and I saw about 40 feet from the bar, angled up under this awning, 2 police officers. And there were no other businesses open on the street or anything. And I recognized immediately what they were doing. And they were, trying to intimidate us and yell at us and scare us, which they did. I recognized it, and I yelled over right away because I was afraid. They did scare me. And I told them, I said, "You guys are targeting a gay bar, and that's not right." And then I said, "You guys should find something better to do with your time than harass gay people." And with that, one of the officers ran, closed the distance between he and I, ran over and threw me to the ground and handcuffed me. And I was just as shocked, and so were the women that were with me. We were all shocked. I mean, nobody, not even me, did I think that was going to happen. Like, why would you do that? And so the next day I had to file the report. Now the officer, once he found out that I was a police officer and so forth and who I was, then it became very chaotic there because he knew he did the wrong thing. Come on, and we knew he did the wrong thing. So they ended up deciding that they were going to write me tickets. And they wrote me 3 tickets: menacing, disorderly conduct, and public intoxication. And I went home. I reported it the next day at work as per policy. It is the only discipline I've ever had in my file because I was disciplined for that incident. Even though weeks later, all of it was dismissed. It was dismissed because there was no merit to do that, right? But because my boss at the time was so angry that I had been in a gay bar, because they had to report that, I was charged with conduct unbecoming, and I was given 5 days off work. And it is the only discipline that I ever received in my entire career. And, I was outed then. And I really did think I was going to get fired. I did. I thought, man, I bet he tries to fire me over this. So when it came back with the 5 days, I just took the 5 days off.
So he wrote you for conduct. specifically because you were in a gay bar?
Yeah, the write-up didn't say it was because I was in a gay bar, but it did say conduct unbecoming, okay? Because I told the officers they were targeting a gay bar, which they were, and it wasn't right.
How did your your interactions on a day-to-day with the people that now they knew, did that change, or was it?
It didn't change so overtly, because by then times had kind of changed from when I very first came in the department. I mean, you know, by then, I'd been there almost 30 years. And, but what did change is that people knew. The men and women of my department knew, and I believe some of them resented it, quite frankly. I think they did. I don't think it was a popular thing, certainly, that I came out. But at that time, I embraced it and thought, I'm out, right? Then I was promoted to major after that. When the new sheriff came on, Jim Neal, he promoted me to major. And as the major, you know, it was great that I was out, quite frankly. I marched in the Pride Parade with my wife, Christine Sandusky, in uniform, and it was one of the most special days of my life, really, to be able to do that. March right down the street in my uniform with my wife at a Pride Parade. I mean, with all the fear and reticence that I had lived with my entire life, and many other gay people know exactly what I'm talking about, it was absolutely just, it was an unbelievable feeling. But then, of course, there was the backlash from that, and I did receive a backlash for doing that from certain individuals in the department that, you know, could not overtly tell me they were upset that I did that, but they were upset.
This brings up that so for what, 30 years you had to work, or close to 30, you had to work in a very male-centric machismo industry,
Right.
And keep that's got to be a lot of stress on you, keeping that life separate.
It was incredibly stressful. And not only was it stressful, but, you know, I would be targeted at times. Of course I would be. People knew, but they didn't know. I don't know that anybody had the courage to ask me right out, right? But, you know, certain things happened to me. One time I worked on this floor where I was the only woman on the floor, and there were bathrooms on that floor. And when I walked to the women's bathroom, on the right by the door, there's a picture of a woman in a skirt, you know, so you see the women's bathroom. And someone had come up and taken a permanent marker and drawn a circle around it with a line through it, and then wrote "dyke" across it really big. And it gave me pause. I didn't like it. You know, and it made me a little fearful, you know. And I took a picture of it. And I took it down to the administrators. At this time, I was a captain. I was a captain of the training section, okay? I held a very high rank in that department. I took it down to the administrators, and each one of those men, 4 of them, they laughed. They thought it was funny. And in fact, one of them made the comment, wow, I don't know how you're going to get that permanent marker off of there. It looks like you're going to have to live with that. And I knew, well, and I always knew, I was on my own. I was absolutely on my own. And you know, I like people to realize I was treated that way, and I wore a uniform, and I held a high rank. Imagine how people are treated when they come into that system and they have absolutely no power. And that is what I sought to remedy as the major of that jail. And in fact, I did make improvements in that way.
So, when did you get married?
So I got married, it's been 6 years ago now. I met my wife. We met late in life, admittedly. I'd been single for quite some time, and I decided I was going to join a golf league. And I thought, I got to get out, you know. And I joined a golf league where I really didn't know very many of the women in the golf league. And there she was. And it's funny, you know, I tell people, it really was for me. I knew it was love at first sight. As soon as I saw her, I thought, this is her, you know. I don't know how I knew. I don't know how to describe that, but it was true. And, you know, we have just a tremendously great relationship. Oh my gosh, you know, she is lovely, absolutely lovely.
Do you feel like, so this is after you've been out, but before you've been out, you obviously were in relationships.
Oh,
at the
sure,
time.
sure.
Was that stressful on your partners as well? I mean, to have to kind of probably be careful at least.
I think it was a little bit, yeah, you know, I think it was stressful for them, but you know, I was with people my same age, and they understood. Because if you were gay or a lesbian and you came up in that era in the city we lived in, one of the most conservative cities around, Hamilton County. I mean, you know, historically, we were very conservative. They understood the value of it too. And it was something that we all knew, all of my friends. And I had a very large network of friends, very large network. I know, you know, we used to joke back in the day that straight people used to think that there was like 5 of us. Well, there were like 500 of us or more in that arena. And we all knew about each other, but it was just a thing. We knew you don't out people. You don't out each other because we knew the stakes were so high.
Did any of them feel like your profession was strange? Did they feel like it was, I guess, repressive and feel it was strange in that sense that you chose to be in law enforcement?
No, I think that the women that I knew and some of the men that I knew thought it was a very respectful position to have and respected me for doing it. I think they knew that I did a good job, that it suited me, I guess I'll put it that way. The uniform has always suited me. I've done well in it. I enjoyed every job I ever had in uniform. And I don't care what that job was. And I had lots of jobs in uniform. It just was a job that I really enjoyed. So, you know, we didn't, you know, yeah, there weren't any. And there were a lot of women that came behind us. When I say us, those of us in that first wave. And then there's a lot of lesbians in the business now who have broken into it and do a very good job.
Were there any people that were either gay and lesbian in the law enforcement system before you came out that you could commiserate, that you knew you could talk to, or did you have that kind of support?
There were so few, so very few. I mean, and the few that there were, they struggled just like I did. I mean, I know there was a woman that I knew that was a Cincinnati police officer who was gay, and I remember her telling me a story that one of the men had come up to her, you know, one of her colleagues in uniform, one of her peers, had come up to her and said that he thought she was a transvestite. And really, I just will never forget that story. It just made me like, oh my God, all of us experienced those things as we came through that, as we were in that first era of women and then lesbians in those uniform positions. So there weren't very many, very, very few of us. And as I said, I just kept my head down, you know, kept my private life private. And I tell people, you know, my name is Charmaine, and I had the nickname Charm from birth. So everybody that really knew me in my life, my personal friends, all call me Charm. And what I discovered once I joined the sheriff's office and became a woman in uniform, I began using the name Charmaine at work because it was a way for me to gauge through all those years who I was talking to. Because I was a pretty outgoing person. I mean, I was out and about quite a bit. And, you know, if somebody said, oh, I met a friend of yours, and then I would say, oh, what did they say my name was? And then they'd say, oh, well, Charmaine. then I would know they were talking to a work person, and to be very careful about that. If they said, oh, they said Charm, then I would know, oh, you were talking to somebody that really knows me. So in that way, I kept kind of a dual life going, and it worked pretty well for the most part. It kind of let me know who was who as I was navigating those social interactions.
Kind of like a little marker that you could look to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
This person has a tag and it says, okay, work person.
Right, yeah, and work people were off limits for me. I
Right.
did not share, did
Yeah.
not.
But you had a partner at one point. Did your partner know? Because that's got to be a fairly close relationship, right?
Oh, yeah, my partner at work,
Yeah.
yeah, he knew. I did end up telling him. He was not very thrilled about it. I didn't know he would have such a weird reaction to it, but he did. I don't think he ever reconciled that. I don't think he ever, I had known him for many years and worked with him pretty closely before I told him. And when I did tell him, I was a little bit surprised that he was a little put off by that, really. And it surprised me. I thought, wow. I mean, he got used to it, but I don't think it ever sat well with him.
So, skipping ahead a little bit, in 2014, you were the law officer of the year.
I was.
Was that Hamilton County or the state or?
That was the American Legion.
Okay.
Those were the veterans that they put me up for that award, and I won that. I won the regional. Let's see. I won the regional and the state, if I remember correctly. And I was very proud and honored to have done that. But yeah, that was when I was the major of the jail.
Okay, so that's during the jail time.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2016, you were the Citizen of the Year.
Yes.
That wasn't through the American Legion?
No, that was through the social workers, the National Social Workers Association. Mm-hmm. And they awarded me that because for the work that I had done in the jail and the work I did with the homeless. When I took over as major, another thing that I did is I just made the declaration, we are a friend of the homeless. And there were homeless people at the time who had been sleeping around our courthouse at night, and they'd been doing it for a decade or more. I mean, it was not a good situation for them or for anybody else because it created issues of every morning our maintenance guys would have to go out at least an hour early and hose the entire area down and haul away the cardboard and the things that people used to sleep on and things like that. And, as law enforcement, they really wanted to remove them for the longest time and never could figure out how to do it, whatever. The answer was not arrest, and I knew that. And so I just said, look, we're going to go over and engage with these people. I want to find out who they are, and I want to find out where they can go and so I started asking around, and I said, who's in charge of the Homeless Coalition? And so somebody gave me a name of this man named Josh Spring. I said, well, where is he? Where can I find him? So they gave me directions to his office, which was down on 12th Street and so forth. So I walked down there on a summer day. I had just become major a short time before that. And I met with him in this little office, and I introduced myself, and I told him why I was there, about the homeless people, and I said, I am going to stop them from sleeping around the courthouse. It's not a good situation. It's been going on for years. It's something that we have to remedy. And he said, well, I'm going to fight you on it. And I said, yeah, I figure you will, but the other thing I hope you'll do is join me at the table because I'm going to have meetings about it first. I'm not going to do anything until I get your suggestions and input. So he did. He not only came to the table, he brought about 10 people with him. So that's when we started the Homeless Initiative meetings. And we had people from all over the tri-state come who were interested in this. And what we all figured out is, it isn't just about removing these people and telling them to go somewhere else. It's about finding out, why are you here and how can we help you not need to be here. And we hired a liaison through the county to help with that work. We fixed some of the things that were a little askew at the homeless centers as far as rules of people coming and going. We found out why certain people were there, and we offered housing and so forth. And I put out a directive, in fact, and we worked up to it. And then once we finally put the sign out that said, you know, you can't sleep here at night anymore, by then we had made tremendous inroads. And I put out the directive to my officers, and I did assign an officer specifically to walk around and engage with the homeless. They were not to arrest any homeless person unless I got a call at home first, unless it was an absolute emergency, of course, and they had to do. And we did not arrest one homeless person. And I said, I don't care if it's 3 a.m, I want you to call me. And we just didn't have to do it. So the situation was remedied in that way, and we found places for people to go.
So, just out of curiosity, why was the courthouse a place where they were sleeping in the first place?
Well, and in fact, they were sleeping at the courthouse because of safety.
Yeah.
They felt safe there. It's pretty well lit. It's right next to the Justice Center. And it was a safety issue for some of them, quite frankly. And there were, you know, because of the way the courthouse was built, there were ways you could, you know, get into a little alcove there or whatever and sleep. You know, but it was dangerous. I mean, we almost had one guy almost got run over because of where he was sleeping, and someone didn't see him down in that one little lot and almost rolled their car right over him. I mean, it was just not a good situation.
So while you're making all these changes and winning these awards, then in 2017, if I'm correct, everything kind of goes the opposite way.
It sure did. So when I arrived at the Justice Center as the major, I pretty immediately began to have serious issues with the new Internal Affairs Department that Jim Neal had put into place. And I started having issues with them because I recognized that they were not holding officers accountable for bad behavior. And I was in charge of that jail. And if officers did the wrong thing and had bad behavior, I wanted them held accountable. It had my name on it. So, and there were situations of sexual harassment of women in uniform by male officers, sexual harassment of female inmates by male officers, and use of forces that were excessive. And I wanted those officers held accountable, and Internal Affairs disagreed with me. So we continued to battle about that. I'll say it that way. We had a lot of disagreements about different issues until finally it came to a head right there at the end of 2016. There was an incident that was captured on tape, the whole thing on video, of one of our officers tossing a man who was 62 years old into a cell head first, and that man was injured very severely. He had to be hospitalized. He had 16 staples in the top of his head, broke his hip, and he had a concussion. And the video is so clear. And when I saw the video, first of all, the incident was reported to me as an accident. It was no accident. When I investigated it, which was my job to do, I realized very immediately this is no accident. I took it to directly chief and sheriff, which is exactly what I'm supposed to do. And they were just going to slow walk it, is the best way I can put it. You know, what I wanted to happen and what I said very immediately is this officer should face criminal charges. This officer should be immediately suspended, and we should start investigating it as such. And none of those things occurred. And I could tell by their reaction. In fact, the chief just simply handed it back to me. He just slid it back across the desk to me and said, just give it to internal. And I knew. I thought, oh my God, they're not going to do anything about this. So when I gave it to internal, I let internal know that, what I thought about it. And internal affairs did not appreciate that. And so a few months later, I found myself in the middle of a hostile work environment complaint. And one person complained that I was hostile to them, that they didn't like how I spoke to them. It was my assistant. And consequently, what they did is they sought out other people. I was in charge of 600 people. And they found, I believe it was all told 18 people to come forward, might have been 20, to say things about me that they didn't like about me. And then they documented those things in black and white. So there was one complaint, but then they took it to seek out other people. And when they brought them up, they said, do you know anybody else that doesn't like her? Do you know anybody else that had any kind of issue that we can talk to? And that's how they built it. And some of the complaints in that report were just unbelievable to me. They literally had one woman come up and say that she thought I was hostile because I passed her in the hallway and didn't say hello to her and didn't smile at her or make eye contact. In the span of 4 years, somewhere in there. I was simply floored by it. And so consequently, the sheriff called me in and he fired me. He fired me because he said the allegations were that I created a hostile work environment and then that I lied about it because I denied it. So then he fired me May 5th, 2017, was a Friday. I was called in. I'd never even seen the report, never even read it. It was sitting on his desk. It was this thick. And he was, pointing his finger at it, you're getting fired because of this. And I said, I haven't even seen it. What is it? What does it say? And he said, well, you'll see when you read the report. And I said, well, then give me a copy of it, right? So at first they weren't going to give me a copy. He and the chief deputy were sitting there, and they said, no, we'll give you a copy on Monday. I said, wait a minute, I need it now, right? So then they decided to give me a copy. So the secretary, the assistant, comes in, hands me a copy of this report. Well, I flipped through it real quick, and it's all redacted. More than half the report is blacked out. And I said, Sheriff, you can't give me a redacted report. And so we went back and forth for another 5 minutes or more. And finally, I had to call internal affairs because the chief deputy said, well, we have to call internal affairs to get a clean copy. I said, okay, let's call them. He said, well, I don't have their number. I said, well, I do. So I call internal affairs to ask for a copy of the report that they made that I'm being fired for, and I get the copy. They deliver it down, and a few minutes later, I have it in my hand. The assistant walks in, hands me the clean copy, and she handed me that copy, and before she handed it to me, the chief said, look, you better be careful with that because you never know that we might leak that to the press. And that was a way for me to be intimidated, and I knew it, that he's going to threaten with giving this report to the press. And I tell you, 100% as I'm sitting here today, when she handed me that copy, I knew I was going to give it to the Enquirer. I didn't even know what was in it, but I knew that's where it was going to go. Because if you're going to threaten me with that report, to give it to the Enquirer as a way to make me, as a way to make me accept you firing me, I'm just not going to accept that. So that's what happened. That's the events.
And what was your emotional response to that?
It was devastating. I was in shock. I literally was in shock. I mean, 33-year career, stellar career, all above average evaluations. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And it was such a weird thing because of how I even got fired. The fact that I hadn't even seen it, that he didn't know what was in it, and that the sheriff himself said, well, at first he said, I'm going to demote you, right? And basically the position he was offering me was like, you can now, not literally, but you can go park cars for us now, kind of thing. The position was really it was like a $50,000 pay cut. I'd come out of uniform, And I said, no, I'm not going to do that, And he said, well, I'm going to let you think about it. And then this is what he did. He had this flyer on his desk, and he gets it and he goes, see this flyer right here? This has your name on it, advertising that you're gonna make a speech to the Women's City Club in 2 weeks. And I said, yeah, I'm scheduled for that. I mean, they'd been advertising it everywhere, I was going to do this big speech. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll give you 30 days to decide so that you can go do this speech, and I'll buy a ticket because I love to hear you speak. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. And I was like, Sheriff, that doesn't matter to me. So at any rate, yeah, it was pretty devastating.
How soon afterwards did you come to the decision that you were going to run for sheriff? Was it something you knew immediately, or did you have to?
Oh, no. It took me a solid year to recover. I was so, it was awful. It was really awful. Thank God I had my wife. I mean, Christine, she took such good care of me. Oh, my God. It was devastating. I mean, she took me everywhere with her. Literally, she worked, independently, so she could do that. And it took me a year, a solid year. I mean, for months, I really couldn't go out the front door. And it wasn't because I was fearful. It was just, well, I was fearful, but I just really didn't have any energy. I didn't have the will to do it. It was awful. It was the most awful, it was so incredibly painful. And I will, there are so many people that I give thanks to now who were my close friends and people who cared about me, who just, I mean, I got cards and letters and phone calls and, and it really did help me through. But yeah, I thought my life was over. I really did. And then I began to heal, and I healed up and got myself help and so forth to deal with my mental trauma, the whole thing. And I decided, with the encouragement of some friends, that I should run for sheriff. And I just thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I can do a better job than him. I can do a way better job than him, right? And these people need me. And I meant the prisoners, I had so much momentum with those programs. We had so much going for us and so many people engaging, and the momentum was tremendous, and it was all positive things. And I didn't want to leave that behind. I got, I got fired right in the middle of, changing a system. So I knew I wanted to get back and finish the job, and that's what I did. And people encouraged me to do that, So I found a mentor of mine, Mary Carol Melton, who came forward, and basically she just said to me, look, you got to get up, you got to get up and get going because there's a lot of work to do here. And she was right, and I did. That's what I did. I got myself going, and she helped me, and a lot of people, my wife helped me, and we won. We won.
And especially in the primary, you won pretty handily.
We did. We won by, it was a landslide, 70%. And you know, prior to even the primary, the very first hurdle we had to jump over was to win the Democratic endorsement, because I was running against an incumbent. He'd been the sheriff. He had the endorsement of the Democrats. I knew he wasn't a Democrat. He's never been a Democrat. He was a Republican all the way until he decided to run for sheriff. And I watched what he did at that command table, and he was no Democrat. And so we were able to convince the Democratic Party to endorse me. I mean, that was a huge piece of me winning that primary. So we won the primary very handedly, then the general.
What do you credit that success with, or what to, I should say?
The success was this. People knew that I was doing the right thing. I had engaged with the community. I had opened the doors. People recognized that I had dropped that drawbridge, that we were, in fact, a friend of the homeless, that I was moving the mark, that people were allowed to come in and help us, and they appreciated it. And they knew that Jim Neal was doing the wrong thing. They believed me, in fact. I guess I can just say it that way. They believed me, and they should believe me, because I was telling the truth. There were some bad things going on inside that facility that needed to be remedied and paid attention to, and now they will be.
So in the interim time between 2017 and now, have they continued on with the good work that you started?
Those programs are not supported. Some of them are still there, some, because I built them on a really firm foundation. You know, it took me years to build those programs, years, because you have to bring in the right people. You can't just let anybody in your jail, in your secured facility. I mean, it has to be the right people, and all those people were vetted by us. And but the programs became less effective, less supported. And I heard from the people that were originally in them. They were like, "Yeah, I don't go down there anymore. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. Yeah, that's not." And it's one of the reasons I ran. And you know, Jim Neal, he was not interested in those programs. He didn't know anything about them, and neither did any of the other command staff men. You know, I was the only woman at the command staff table, by the way.
So I guess I know one of the things you're going to work on right away.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So what are your other big plans for the future now?
Well, you know, our criminal justice system, it isn't just me. There's a lot of people around the nation, really good people, smart people, who know it needs to be reformed, and they're working on that. And there are so many people that have made such great inroads to that, and I want to be a part of it. I want to join that movement of improving our criminal justice system, and it is my belief that one of the best ways to make those sustainable changes is from the inside out. And what better place to start than the jail and prisons? You know, there's a wound there that's been there for a very, very long time between law enforcement and some people who have not felt that they've been treated well, and they haven't. And the deepest part of that wound is in those jails and prisons. And we need to address it. So that's what I'm going to do.
So outside of the jail, what are your new responsibilities now that you're the top dog?
Wow, yeah. Outside of the jail now, as the sheriff, I'm in charge of the court service division and the road patrol division. And our road patrol division for Hamilton County is quite large. I mean, we have what is called contract cars, where certain municipalities and townships pay us to provide police services to them. And we have a lot of depth to our law enforcement agency that we have built over many years. I mean, we have helicopters, we have boats, we have lots of what I call bells and whistles for security purposes and surveillance purposes. And there are about, I'm going to ballpark it, about 200 men and women that work in our law enforcement realm. And we have a great deal, as I said, of depth. So we have criminal investigations. We have RENEW, which is Regional Narcotics Unit. We do a lot in law, a lot of different functions in law enforcement. So I'll be in charge of that as well.
That's got to be a new challenge, right?
Oh, it is. It is. It's quite the challenge. Our department as a whole is 900 strong. So it is a really big challenge. But I'm not just going to be doing it myself. I'm bringing some of those excellent men and women that already work there in uniform. And I like to make that clear to everybody. Look, there are those few in uniform that do wrong and that need to be held accountable. But there are so many more of us that wear the badge and do it and wear it for the right reason. And those are the men and women that I'm bringing forward to help me run this department. And there are a lot of them. And it's one of the things I intend to do as well, is raise our profile so that people understand, what good we do and how good we are and some of the challenges that we face wearing that uniform as well. And that's some of the things that I have on my plate.
And something recently something else you're going to have to deal with is, how do you feel about this whole defund the police that's popped up since, I guess, this spring is when I really started to hear about it?
Yeah, I do not believe in defunding the police. It's not a very good terminology to use when you're talking about what I think is criminal justice reform. I think what we do want to do is we want to put our funding that we use for the police, and we want to put it in places that will strengthen us in our response to the community. Strengthen our ability to gain the community's trust. And we do that in reaching out, just as I did in the jail, to social service people, to people who work in the mental health field, to people who have those softer skills that is in their expertise and their wheelhouse. And we have officers with soft skills. Sure we do. I mean, we have a lot of talented people. A lot of times, particularly out on the street, our officers are charged with enforcing the law. And that's not always a popular thing to do. And, in particular, they're met with so many different circumstances in people's lives. And they are struggling to be everybody. They're struggling to be the social service worker, to be the mental health worker, to be the jobs and family service worker, and all of those things along with being that law enforcement officer. So I want to put funding to our policing agencies that bring some of those extra skills along and help us with those things.
Some of those softer skills.
Absolutely, the softer skills.
And having experience in the jail, you must be very concerned about COVID-19's impact in that, enclosed facility, in that population.
Absolutely, and it is going to be one of my objectives, is to make us as COVID resistant as possible. I'm going to mandate masks. I'm going to mandate cleaning protocols. I am going to do every possible, proven requirement that I'm going to initiate those requirements to keep everybody safe.
And that's got to be a pretty difficult needle to thread.
Yeah.
Seeing Cincinnati is still a pretty conservative town, and
it is. It is a conservative town, but Cincinnati also is a mix of people. And, I would not have won this election if some people on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans, hadn't voted for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, they know me. As I said, I'm law and order. I'm a no-nonsense person. I'm not going to put up with any ridiculousness from anybody, and that means whether you're a prisoner or you're an officer. We're all going to follow the rules, and we're going to follow them equally and fairly, and we're all going to be held to a standard. So even in our conservative town, I find friendships. I sure do. I mean, there are people that are on the other side of the aisle from me who are of a different political persuasion, who have great ideas, who have big hearts, who want people to succeed. I know those people, you know, and just because you have a D or an R behind your name doesn't mean that, you know, it's black and white. It just really means that you got to get to know each other and work together, and that's what I intend to do. And there are a lot of really, really good people in Cincinnati of both Republican and Democrat and independent for that reason.
It sounds like you got some good support. Up until this point, how have the jails in Hamilton County done?
Well, we were rated the worst jail in the state of Ohio when I took over as major. In just 3 years, myself and the staff, we brought that up to the best ranked jail in the state of Ohio. We brought up our score, I'll say it that way, our score on essential requirements for your jail and important requirements for your jail. And we are really, we are an excellent jail. We tightened all the bolts, and it really was a situation where the bolts were all pretty loose. You had to go around and find out what needed to be changed, and we did it. So we have an excellent jail.
And how have they handled the COVID-19 so far?
Well, that I have not heard good things about. Of course, I'm on the outside looking in to this administration. But what I've heard and what I've seen in part is that officers are not mandated to wear masks. They haven't done a very good job of protecting people inside the jail. The jail's cleanliness standards have been let go, and that's something I'm going to improve. And, you know, with COVID-19, you have to have good cleanliness standards. So, yeah, so there are things that have not been paid attention to by the current administration that I intend to pay close attention to.
It's going to be an interesting time to come back into it.
Well, it is. It's going to be a climb. But I tell you, getting to where I am right now today, sitting here talking to you and being the sheriff-elect of Hamilton County, that was a climb. And it was a climb like no other. I mean, you know, and each and every time we got to a point where I felt like, God, can we even go any further? I mean, can we really make this happen? Another person would reach their hand down and pull us up even further. I mean, and that's how we got to where we are, is people helped us. And I'm grateful for that. I know there's more of the climb, but it's a different kind of climb now, and I look forward to it.
Do you think that a 14-year-old you would have ever suspected that you'd be the sheriff of Hamilton County?
No. I would have never predicted this for myself. In fact, even when I was the major, I thought, well, this is a great way to end your career right here. I would have stayed being the major for as long as I could, as long as age and health would let me, and done the things I was doing and been perfectly happy in my life, right? But you just, you know, I had to rise to the challenge. I had to do what I thought was right, and this is what happened.